Now it's time to think and discern. This is Bob Burney Live.
Welcome to Bob Burney Live. This is the 4 o'clock hour. You know, many people do not understand the term apologist. They think that's somebody who goes around apologizing. Well, no, it's actually almost exactly the opposite. And a desperate need in the church today is for solid biblical apologetics, and that's why it is a privilege to welcome to the program Jamie Goodlet, who is an apologist, a speaker, and an author, and a local resident here in Central Ohio. Jamie, great to talk to you today.
It's great to be on, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Well, it is my privilege, and I want our listeners to get acquainted with you. Looking at your biography begins with being a firefighter. Transitioning from being a firefighter to ministry to apologetics, that's not exactly your common transition.
No,
so
it's not.
kind of walk us through your firefighter days and how God brought you from that into apologetics.
It's absolutely amazing when you look back just to see how God is just weaving the tapestry, as Ravi Zacharias would say. I was a fireman with the city of Youngstown, Ohio for over a decade. I absolutely loved it. I loved being a fireman. I fell through a floor in a fire and hurt my back and became addicted to prescription pain medication. And that began a 2-year battle with addiction that ultimately ended in my leaving the fire department to pursue other things. And it was during that time that I really I did a lot of introspection, and I wanted to know, God, why did this happen to me? I was a church-going, God-loving, God-fearing man, and yet now here I am losing one of the best job I could have ever hoped for. And it was at that point that God inserted another love into my life, a second love, of this thing called apologetics. And apologetics is just, it comes from the Greek, apologia. It means just to make a reasoned defense, something you would see in a court of law. And I had heard someone on the radio, and I thought, boy, this sounds amazing. I want to do this. And it was at that point I really felt a call of God on my life into the ministry, specifically into apologetics. But I did take a step from being a fireman to associate pastor with Trinity Assembly of God on the city's west side of Columbus with student ministry. I saw a huge need that our students be equipped with the right tools in order to vend what they believe in this culture. And so I went from being a fireman to being called to be an apologist and then functioning as an associate pastor. And then recently, in the last year or so, I felt another call of God to step out and do apologetics full time, and that's where I'm at now.
Well, you mentioned on your website that recent studies show that nearly 80% of students leave church, leave the faith during their first year out of high school. And I'm convinced, Jamie, that the major reason for that is that the church is not giving a biblical foundation to our young people. We want them to play games, have fun, which, by the way, is fine, but we are not giving them a biblical foundation, and most kids come out of high school, even though they've grown up in the church, basically biblically illiterate. Am I wrong on that?
No, that is true. And I was determined that wasn't going to happen with my students. I mean, listen, people claim to walk away from their faith for all kinds of reasons, but I'm convinced that a student isn't going to come home from college on Thanksgiving break, and when mom or dad or Uncle Jim ask them, hey, why did you leave Christianity? They're not going to say, well, because I wanted to sleep with my girlfriend. You know, they're going to pontificate about, well, how can an all good and all loving God do this or do that? And so they're going to bring up the intellectual issues of the day as like, this is why I can't be a Christian. And so what we're seeing is regardless of what the root cause of their leaving, the excuses or the reasons that they're giving are intellectual. They're saying, hey, I walked away because I had questions, and either nobody answered them or nobody answered them appropriately, or I didn't even feel comfortable asking the questions. And so we see in upwards of 80, it's probably more realistically around between 60 and 75%. But we do see this mass exodus of students leaving high school and leaving their home completely unprepared. They have no idea what they believe, and they have no idea why they believe it. For all they're concerned, the only reason they're a Christian is a cultural thing. You know, they grew up here in America, Western democracy that was rooted and based in Christianity, and you know, maybe they grew up in a Christian home, and so they have absolutely no idea why it is they believe these things. And if you don't have that foundation, why would you want to believe some of these things? Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to go through school being called a homophobe, being called, you know, all these other things because of your beliefs in Judeo-Christian values.
The website for Jamie Goodlet is confidentcontender.com. confidentcontender.com. Jamie, how is your ministry of apologetics being received? You're swimming upstream today. The evangelical church, again, this is my opinion, has become obsessed with entertainment, nickels and noses, getting more and more people in, having more lights, having more smoke, entertaining. And here you are coming along with a strong emphasis on learning doctrine, learning theology, learning to contend for the faith. How are you being received?
Well, you wouldn't think that those two things go hand in hand. They do seem to be abrasive towards one another. And here's the thing: I'm not against being seeker sensitive. If by seeker sensitive you mean just removing any barriers to, you know, in your church services or at your church that would be unnecessarily uncomfortable, I'm all for that. I don't think we should make people feel uncomfortable. But if what you're talking about is the gospel, if the gospel is what makes you feel uncomfortable, then the only thing you can do at that point is change the gospel or water it down. Yeah. And so, you know, I do get some pushback from churches and from people, but, you know, I find it's feast or famine. It's all or nothing. Either a church is totally on board with this thing called apologetics and sound doctrine and sound theology, or they're not. There's not a whole lot of middle ground. And what I really want to fight for are those churches that maybe aren't quite as familiar with this. Some of these churches aren't even, don't even realize that there's a big problem. Yeah. They're almost locked in their evangelical conclave and their little bubble, and they don't even realize that this is an issue. So, I find that it's a mixed bag. Some churches are accepting, while other churches and other people don't want anything to do with it. Yeah.
Again, the website is confidentcontender.com. My guest is Jamie Goodlet, Goodlet. I must step aside and take a quick break, and then we'll come back and visit again with Jamie Goodlet. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bob Burney Live, and welcome again to Jamie Goodlet, an apologist. His website, confidentcontender.com. You might want him to come and speak to your adults, your young people, your teenagers. Confidentcontender.com. Jamie, I notice on your website you deal with particular issues that the church is struggling with, and one of those is the whole LGBTQ, marriage, family, human sexuality, and I'm finding that many churches in the evangelical community are trying desperately to just stay neutral, not make waves, not offend anybody. And I really gather from you that you're a very loving, caring, compassionate person. But would you agree with me that this is one area where the evangelical church cannot remain neutral?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this is a hill that we have to die on.
Yeah.
And a lot of people ask me, why is this such a big thing? Why this and not other things? Well, listen, if you guys were making a big deal about felony home invasion being okay, then we would be making a big deal about that as well. So part of it is the culture forcing our hand to take a hard position based upon our beliefs. And it's hard because, listen, it's not an easy road to hold fast to. I mean, my wife says all the time, I would much rather just say, yeah, love who you want.
Yeah.
But we know that's not what we can do if we're going to remain true to the Bible and to biblical inerrancy.
And it is possible, isn't it, to stand for the truth, contend for the truth on marriage, family, God's plan, God's purpose, and still be loving and compassionate? That is possible, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when I dialogue with other people on this, it's ironic that they say that I'm not being tolerant, and I have to ask them, what do you think that word means? The word tolerant means something stinks, and I'm going to plug my nose and deal with it. If I don't agree with something, but I'm okay you holding that position, and if you're okay, my holding my position. But what I'm finding are some of the people that claim, that shout from the rooftops to be the most tolerant, are sometimes the least tolerant among us. And I just want to have a conversation with people in love. And I know this is cliche, but the whole adage that you can hate the sin and love the sinner, that's true. That is true. You could really despise someone's actions, yet still love them. And if you're a parent, you know this all too well. Not everything our children do we approve of. Not everything our children do we love. As a matter of fact, there are certain things that our parents hate. My parents hated my addiction. My parents hated the fact that I was struggling and going through that, but they still loved me unconditionally. And that's the kind of love that Jesus is asking for. We can't bow down. We have to stand for the truth, but we can still do it with love.
So in other words, you can contend for the faith without being contentious.
That's right.
All right. What are some of the other major areas that you find the evangelical church must deal with today?
Well, of course, the other elephant in the room is abortion, and that has taken a bigger spotlight recently with some of the court battles and things like that. So abortion is a big one. And you know what? I find that if churches would just focus on the resurrection of Jesus and the evidence for that as far as their apologetic, it would do wonders. I'm blown away at how many pastors will give a service on Easter morning and yet not say anything about the evidence for the resurrection. Well, if you would just hold to that,
And I say that every Easter on this program. I am blown away at how many pastors want a big crowd on Easter, Resurrection Day, and they themselves do not believe in a literal resurrection from the grave. It's just mind-blowing.
I'm not sure how you remain an Orthodox Christian and not believe in a bodily resurrection of Jesus.
All right. Describe for me quickly what you do when you are invited to a local church.
Well, typically what happens is I coordinate ahead of time with whoever their point person is on what it is they want me to speak about. There are a few things I speak on that I feel that I'm qualified to speak on: abortion, basic apologetics, does God exist, evidence for God. Of course, we discussed LGBTQ issues and the resurrection. And so within that context, we kind of develop a plan on the best way to present this information, whether it's for students. Of course, if you're doing something for students, it's going to be wholly different than if you're doing something for the adults. And so, I create a plan, and then I'll go in usually and give anywhere between a half hour, sometimes for students, up to an hour and a half presentation on one of these topics. And then we usually have a very robust and exciting Q&A session that follows, because, of course, people are going to have a lot of questions. And a lot of times that's where I find people are the most engaged and interested, is in the Q&A part of the event.
Yeah, in my 50-plus years of ministry, what I miss most were Thursday evening Bible discussions in Wichita, Kansas, years ago, where we would have 200 college kids with just a wide open, just wild and crazy question and answer. It was wonderful, and I miss those days. All right, people can contact you at confidentcontender.com, correct?
That's right. You can also find me on Facebook if you just search Confident Contender, or on YouTube if you do the same search that. I also host a podcast every other week called the God or Not podcast, where my co-host is an atheist, and we deal with all these kind of topics on that podcast, and you can find that at godornotpodcast.com.
Wow, that's cool. Again, Jamie Goodlet is my guest, and his website, confidentcontender.com. Jamie, I am grateful that God has raised you up for this ministry. Boy, you are needed. May your tribe increase.
Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right, we need to take a break, and then we will return with more Bob Burney Live.